Young and the Restless. Sharon versus Phyllis. Nick tug-of-war explodes. Young and the Restless sees Nick Newman, Joshua Morrow, hoping that Sharon Newman, Sharon Case, and Phyllis Summers, Michelle Stafford, will keep playing nice. But there was a recent shift in their dynamic that's a little disturbing. We are going to talk about how Nick is fooling himself because both Sharon and Phyllis want him back and a tug-of-war over the Newman hunk is coming soon. Before we get into it though, please click subscribe if you're not following us. Sharon Newman and Phyllis Summers post-kidnapping bond tested on YNR. So after Sharon and Phyllis's kidnapping ordeal at the hands of crazy Alan/Martin Laurent, Christopher Cousins, they decided to put all that animosity and the years-long feud behind them. It was great. During their captivity, they were at each other's throats. But then Sharon and Phyllis both had to save each other's lives. So, Sharon developed this new respect for Phyllis and vice versa. Sharon was stressed out after what they went through. But Phyllis was the one who's really been struggling with all the trauma. So Sharon had a hard time. But Phyllis is the one who's haunted by these terrible nightmares. Sharon and Phyllis Summers were trying to lean on each other because they're the only two people who know exactly how the other was feeling because they went through the same thing. But then Sharon Newman went off to London with Nick and the kids to visit Noah Newman, Rory Gibson. And while they were gone, Phyllis was really struggling. She would not admit until recently how much Alan and the kidnapping is still affecting her and that she really needs help. So, she's fixating on things. Phyllis is trying to keep her mind occupied and it's not healthy. Lots of people have noticed. Phyllis turns to Nick for help with trauma on Young and the Restless. Just recently though, Phyllis finally admitted to one person that she really needed help and that person was Nick. And other people have tried. Daniel Romalotti, Michael Graziade, advised his mom that she needed to face her trauma so she can heal instead of just kind of pushing it all down and pushing forward. Phyllis is clearly spiraling. She needs help. And it seemed like Sharon might be the one who could get through and could really help Phyllis the most because she had the best perspective. Sharon's jealousy flares over Nick and Phyllis. But then when Sharon came back from London, things got weird. Nick had brought Phyllis over to the park to talk to her. Just try to help her clear her mind and relax when she was at a bad point. And Nick had promised Phyllis Summers that he'll be there for her on Young and the Restless. But then Sharon happened to stumble across them in the park and she felt like she'd walked up on something, and Nick could see very clearly that Sharon was jealous. And the other day when she kept grilling Nick, her jealousy of Phyllis being close to Nick, it was visceral. It was palpable, and he said something. And it goes both ways. I do think Phyllis is jealous of Sharon's friendship with Nick. On Phyllis's side, she hasn't said anything about wanting to reunite with Nick romantically. But when Phyllis overheard Nick defending her to Billy Abbott, Jason Thompson in the park, I do think something sparked in her. Nick was going off on Billy, for firing Phyllis from Abbottcom when she was at a low point, and Nick was chastising Billy and said that Phyllis desperately needs a purpose. And then Nick was going on and on about what a wonderful person Phyllis is. And that's when she happened to walk by. So hearing Nick come to her defense like that and say these things clearly affected Phyllis. And then she decided to reach out to Nick and accept his offer to be there to let him help her. But whether or not Phyllis has romance with Nick on her mind remains to be seen right now. I would say she doesn't. At least not yet. Nick friend-zones Sharon Newman again on YNR. As for Sharon though, she's been pining after Nick for quite some time. Sharon's behavior even prompted Nick Newman to bring it up. And this has been, I don't know, a couple of months ago, I think before the Alan kidnapping. He was saying that it seems like Sharon is always waiting for something to happen between them. Like she's waiting for Nick to kiss her or something. That's what he said to Sharon. But then Nick also made it very clear to Sharon, he only wants to be friends. He doesn't want to risk hurting her again and ruining their friendship. He made it out to be like, oh, it's me. It's not you. And Nick also said that that's his same feeling about Phyllis. He likes where they're at. Everybody's in the friend zone. Young and the Restless. The Nick, Sharon, Phyllis love triangle returns? But come on, Nick is kidding himself if he thinks Sharon and Phyllis are going to get along long term. And it already seems like whatever friendship that they were starting to forge is already fizzling. And it seems like it's because of how they both feel about Nick. Sharon definitely didn't want to be just friends with Nick. And as for Phyllis, she says that's what she wants. But let's face it, if Nick plays hero for her, Phyllis may start to fall for him because she's in this emotionally precarious place. And in the end, both of these ladies are probably going to want to be with Nick. So, here's how it might go. Phyllis and Sharon might each make a move to get closer to Nick in a more personal way, romantic, intimate, something like that. And they're going to be back to picking at each other. Phyllis is definitely unhinged right now. She honestly does need help. Sharon has no excuse because she's in a good place. She's stable right now. Nobody's drugging her. She's not hallucinating Cameron Kirsten, Lyndon Ashby, or anything. You know, I would say Sharon's probably in the best place she's been in a while. But for some reason, she's fixated on Nick. Young and the Restless. Nick says no? A lot of Young and the Restless fans think that she was way out of line with Phyllis in the park. And Nick even questioned Sharon and accused her of being jealous of Phyllis. Sharon tried to brush it off, but it's clear, yeah, jealous. So I think even though Nick friend-zoned her several times, Sharon may soon make a blatant play to get with Nick. Meanwhile, he's trying to help Phyllis because she needs it. But the more he helps her, the more it's probably going to bother Sharon. And it's unfortunate because it was kind of nice to see that Phyllis and Sharon bickering had stopped. It was something new for them because it was kind of exhausting. But with no love interest in sight for Nick or for Sharon or for Phyllis, you got to wonder what the Y&R writers have planned for these three. With no romantic leads in town for any of them, no prospects, really no guys at loose ends, not that are age appropriate or anything like that. You know, are they going to leave these three long-time characters at loose ends with no one to warm their beds? Or are we heading for another go-round of Sharon and Nick and Phyllis in a triangle that we've seen more than once? I do suspect Nick is about to find himself in a very uncomfortable position, stuck in a tug-of-war, fending off advances from both Sharon and Phyllis and jealous tantrums from both of his exes. Is he going to be able to say no thank you to both of them? Are they going to take no for an answer? Could Nick and Sally reunite? Dipped behind the skyline of Genoa City as crimson lights buzzed with its usual after-work rush. Sharon Rosales arranged pastries behind the counter, her movements calm, but her mind far from peaceful. Lately she'd felt the energy shifting. Nick drifting, Phyllis scheming, and fate twisting all around her. She didn't want to fight. She didn't want to revisit the ghosts of their tangled history. But she could feel something coming. And Genoa City was about to feel it too. A storm brews. Nick Newman stood outside Crimson Lights, hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets, torn between two paths he'd walked 1,000 times. Sharon. Phyllis. Two women who knew him better than he sometimes knew himself. Two women who represented very different versions of his life. Sharon's warmth, loyalty, calm. Phyllis's fire, unpredictability, passion. He loved pieces of both, but lately, he couldn't ignore the magnetic pull between the past and present. Inside, Sharon noticed him through the window. A soft smile tugged at her lips, filled with hope but edged with caution. She poured 2 cups of coffee, just in case he needed the comfort she knew only she could provide. Outside, another car pulled in. Candy apple red. Convertible. Aggressively Phyllis. Nick closed his eyes, immediately recognizing the sound of the engine, the click of her heels, and the unmistakable whirlwind that always seemed to accompany her. Perfect timing, Phyllis said brightly as she slid up beside him. I was hoping to catch you before you walked in there. Phyllis, he muttered, already bracing. Oh, relax, she waved. I'm not here to claw Sharon's eyes out. Today. Nick groaned. Can we just not? Nope, she said, popping the P as she pushed inside the cafe. 2 queens. 1 battlefield. Sharon froze mid-pour when the door chimed. Phyllis strutted in like she owned the place, fiery confidence burning off her like heat. Hi, Sharon. Too sweet. Too sharp. Phyllis. Polite. Controlled. Dangerously calm. Nick stepped between them instinctively, but both women ignored him. What brings you here? Sharon asked, her tone as smooth as winter frost. Oh, I just thought I'd get myself a coffee and talk to Nick about something important. Phyllis leaned her elbows on the counter. You know, private matters. Sharon's brows lifted. If Nick wants privacy, he can have it. But this is a public place. My place. Phyllis smirked. Oh, trust me, I remember. Once upon a time, you two practically lived in here. Sharon swallowed irritation, refusing to give Phyllis the reaction she wanted. Our history isn't a weapon, Phyllis. No, she agreed, flashing a wicked grin. It's an encyclopedia. And I've read every chapter. Nick rubbed his forehead. Guys, please. Nick, Phyllis said, standing straighter, you need to choose. Are we talking or not? Because I'm done giving Sharon room to slither between us. Sharon's eyes widened. Slither. You heard me. Phyllis, I'm not fighting for Nick. That's the problem. Phyllis snapped. You don't have to fight. You just exist, and suddenly he's looking at you like you're the glowing saintly answer to all his problems. Sharon's voice softened. Nick and I share a lot. But whatever he's feeling, that's his journey, not mine to manipulate. Can you say the same? Phyllis bristled. Nick finally stepped forward. Enough. Both of you. But it was too late. The match had been lit. The tug of war ignites. Phyllis tossed her hair back. Look, Sharon, let's cut the tea party tone. We both know you want him. Sharon's eyes darkened. I want Nick to be happy. With or without me. Spare me, Phyllis scoffed. You've been orbiting him for months. You swoop in with your calm little smiles, your comforting words. That's who I am, Sharon countered. Exactly. Phyllis barked. Everyone sees you as the pure, wholesome one. And me? I'm the dangerous choice. The risky one. But you know what? Nick and I have chemistry that you can't touch. Sharon set down the coffee pot with an audible click. Chemistry isn't everything. Sometimes stability matters. Oh, please. Phyllis laughed. You're just afraid he'll realize he wants passion over predictability. Nick's jaw clenched. Seriously, quit using me like a trophy. Trophy. Sharon repeated. Phyllis is the one treating you like a contest. And you're not. Phyllis fired back. Sharon took a deep breath. The truth is, Nick will choose where he feels most understood. I don't need to fight you for that. If he chooses you, Phyllis, I'll accept it. That struck a nerve. Phyllis slammed her hand on the counter. You think he'd choose you? After everything? Your past breakdowns, your secrets. Phyllis. Nick snapped. Sharon stiffened, pain flickering in her eyes but poise holding. That's enough, she said quietly. Leave. Oh, I'll leave, Phyllis hissed. But Nick? You and I have unfinished business. Don't let Sharon guilt you into thinking you owe her something. Then she spun around, storming out in a blaze of red and fury. The door slammed behind her. Young and the Restless. Nick says no? A lot of Young and the Restless fans think that she was way out of line with Phyllis in the park. And Nick even questioned Sharon and accused her of being jealous of Phyllis. Sharon tried to brush it off, but it's clear, yeah, jealous. So I think even though Nick friend-zoned her several times, Sharon may soon make a blatant play to get with Nick. Meanwhile, he's trying to help Phyllis because she needs it. But the more he helps her, the more it's probably going to bother Sharon. And it's unfortunate because it was kind of nice to see that Phyllis and Sharon bickering had stopped. It was something new for them because it was kind of exhausting. But with no love interest in sight for Nick or for Sharon or for Phyllis, you got to wonder what the Y&R writers have planned for these three. With no romantic leads in town for any of them, no prospects, really no guys at loose ends, not that are age appropriate or anything like that. You know, are they going to leave these three long-time characters at loose ends with no one to warm their beds? Or are we heading for another go-round of Sharon and Nick and Phyllis in a triangle that we've seen more than once? I do suspect Nick is about to find himself in a very uncomfortable position, stuck in a tug of war, fending off advances from both Sharon and Phyllis and jealous tantrums from both of his exes. Is he going to be able to say no thank you to both of them? Are they going to take no for an answer? Could Nick and Sally reunite on Y&R? Me. That was the truth Sharon had both expected and feared. Nick, she said gently, you don't need to figure it out tonight. Or tomorrow. Take the time you need. Your heart isn't a battlefield. Nick exhaled, relief washing across his features. I knew you'd say that. That's why He cut himself off. Sharon didn't push. But Genoa City never sleeps. As Nick hugged her goodbye and stepped out into the night, Sharon watched him go with a soft ache in her chest. Phyllis waited across the street in her car, eyes cold, calculating, and far from finished. This isn't over, she whispered to herself. Not even close. Sharon closed the blinds of crimson lights, sensing the war wasn't just beginning. It was reigniting. And in Genoa City, a tug-of-war over Nick Newman had the explosive potential. To tear the whole town crimson lights was warm and bright, the gentle hum of the espresso machine filling the room like background music. Sharon Newman wiped her hands on a towel, glancing toward the door each time it chimed. She wasn't expecting trouble, but ever since the chaotic kidnapping ordeal, Phyllis trapped, Sharon forced into dangerous negotiations, Nick caught in the emotional crossfire, Sharon had learned not to take a quiet moment for granted. But peace in Genoa City never lasted long. Especially when Phyllis Summers was involved. Sharon finally spotted the flash of fiery red hair as Phyllis swept into the coffeehouse wearing a fitted leather jacket. Her expression a blend of gratitude, exhaustion, and defiant confidence. "You look like someone on a mission," Sharon said lightly, sliding a mug toward her. Phyllis gave a half smile. "Well, when have you ever known me not to be on a mission?" Their post-trauma dynamic was something no one could have predicted. Somehow the nightmare they'd survived had carved out an unexpected truce, maybe even a friendship, between two women who'd been rivals for decades. Their mutual recognition of each other's strength, resilience, and pure stubbornness had bonded them in ways nothing else could. But that bond was shakier than either was willing to admit. Phyllis accepted the mug but didn't take a sip right away. "I got the call," she said quietly. Sharon's hand stilled on the counter. "About the investigation?" Phyllis nodded. "They didn't charge him. Not enough evidence." Her jaw clenched, eyes glinting with anger. "So we survived all of that. Everything he put us through, for nothing." Sharon exhaled slowly. "That doesn't mean justice won't come another way." "Oh no." Phyllis shook her head sharply. "Don't give me the justice finds a way speech. I know you're trying to help, but I can't do calm right now. I can't do zen. I can't do tea and breathing exercises." Sharon crossed her arms. "Then what can you do? Go rogue again? Because every time you do that, someone ends up hurt. Including you." Phyllis blinked, offended. "Wow. And here I thought saving your life earned me a little credit." "Of course it did. But that doesn't mean I'm going to stand by and let you torch what little peace you have left." Phyllis slammed her mug down, coffee splashing over the rim. Customers nearby glanced over nervously. Sharon lifted a calming hand to them before turning back to Phyllis. "Let's talk in the back," Sharon murmured firmly. Phyllis followed her, arms crossed protectively over her chest. Once the door closed behind them, Sharon turned to face her fully. "I know you're scared," Sharon said gently. Phyllis stiffened. "I'm not scared." "You are," Sharon replied. "Not of the man who did this. Of what comes next." Phyllis's silence was telling. Sharon continued softly, "It's hard when the adrenaline fades. When the danger is gone and all you're left with is you. With the fear, the guilt, the memories." "I don't do vulnerability," Phyllis muttered. "I know. That's why this is so hard for you." Phyllis looked away, eyes shimmering with anger that was much closer to heartache. "I keep replaying it. Locked up. No air. No one coming. And you," she shook her head. "You showed up for me. You could have walked away and no one would have blamed you." Sharon stepped closer. "I care about you, Phyllis. Even if we've spent half our lives pretending we don't." For a moment, the tension eased between them. But that fragile calm shattered when the back door creaked open and Nick Newman stepped inside. His eyes darted between the two women, reading the tension instantly. "What happened?" Phyllis threw her hands up. "Perfect. Exactly who I didn't want to see right now." Nick frowned. "Phyllis." "No," she snapped. "Don't play peacekeeper. Don't play hero. I'm done with everyone telling me how to heal." Nick turned to Sharon. "Is she okay?" "Ask me again when she's not about to implode," Sharon whispered. Phyllis whirled around. "You two think you have me all figured out, don't you? That Phyllis Summers is just one bad decision away from blowing everything up." Nick stepped forward. "Hey, you survived something traumatic. Both of you did. Maybe you should." Phyllis cut him off. "I don't need therapy. I need justice." Sharon's voice was gentle but firm. "And what are you planning to do to get it?" Phyllis opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I don't know. But I can't sit still. I can't pretend I'm okay. And I can't rely on anyone, not even you, to fix it." Nick touched her arm gently, but she pulled back. Phyllis's voice trembled. I hate feeling weak. Sharon stepped in front of her. You're not weak. You're human. Phyllis's composure finally cracked, tears spilling over. Nick reached out again, but this time Sharon shook her head slightly, stopping him. She understood what Phyllis needed in that moment. Not a romantic rescue, not a knight in shining armor, but someone who wouldn't judge her breakdown. Sharon placed a hand on Phyllis's shoulder. I'm here, she whispered. Phyllis covered her mouth with her hand, shoulders shaking. It was the most vulnerable Sharon had ever seen her. After a long silence, Phyllis finally breathed out, I don't know how to live with what happened. You don't have to figure it out today, Sharon said. You just have to keep going. Nick nodded. We'll help you. Phyllis wiped her face, suddenly self-conscious. I didn't want either of you to see me like this. Too late, Sharon said softly. And guess what? We still care. Phyllis let out a shaky laugh. I'm not good at this whole bonding thing. Sharon smiled. Neither am I. But here we are. The three of them stood in the quiet room, the intensity of the moment settling like dust after a storm. The kidnapper might have been off the hook for now, but the emotional fallout was far from over. And the fragile bond between Sharon and Phyllis was only going to be tested further as they struggled to navigate their trauma in very different ways. But for the first time in years, they weren't enemies. They weren't rivals. They were survivors. And that bond, however unexpected, might be the very thing that holds them together through the next storm that inevitably rolls through Genoa City. Nick reached out again, but this time Sharon shook her head slightly, stopping him. She understood what Phyllis needed in that moment. Not a romantic rescue, not a knight in shining armor, but someone who wouldn't judge her breakdown. Sharon placed a hand on Phyllis's shoulder. I'm here, she whispered. Phyllis covered her mouth with her hand, shoulders shaking. It was the most vulnerable Sharon had ever seen her. Sharon smiled. Neither am I. But here we are. The three of them stood in the quiet room, the intensity of the moment settling like dust after a storm. The kidnapper might have been off the hook for now, but the emotional fallout was far from over. And the fragile bond between Sharon and Phyllis was only going to be tested further as they struggled to navigate their trauma in very different ways. But for the first time in years, they weren't enemies. They weren't rivals. They were survivors. And that bond, however unexpected, might be the very thing that holds them together through the next storm that inevitably rolls through Genoa City. Because this was the Newman-Summers reality. They didn't have to like each other to save each other. They just had always walked through Genoa City with her chin high, her heels sharp, and her confidence sharper. But tonight, after the storm, after the kidnapping, after everything, she was a woman shaken down to her core. The Grand Phoenix penthouse was silent except for the soft hum of the city lights beyond the windows. Shadows clung to the walls, stretching out in angles that felt too long, too thin, too menacing. She wrapped her red silk robe tighter around herself as she paced the living room. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still feel the rough cloth over her face, the cold cement beneath her knees, the echo of an unfamiliar voice whispering threats she couldn't shake. Her breath hitched. She tried to swallow it away, but her hands were trembling. Phyllis Summers didn't tremble. Not unless the world was falling apart. Her phone vibrated on the marble counter. She tried to ignore it. She didn't want anyone to see her like this, but when she glanced at the screen and saw the name, something inside her softened. Nick Newman. Without thinking, she picked up. Hey, she whispered. Phyllis. His voice was gentle, cautious. You sound off. Are you okay? No. But she wasn't sure she could say it out loud. Can you come over? She finally asked. There was no hesitation. I'm on my way. Nick arrived 10 minutes later, knocking only once before she opened the door. His eyes immediately scanned her face, tracing the faint bruise on her cheek, the exhaustion in her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. Phyllis, he said softly. Don't, she muttered, turning away before she broke into pieces. Don't look at me like that. How else am I supposed to look at you? You were kidnapped, threatened, traumatized. You don't have to pretend you're fine. She stiffened. Pretending was her specialty, her survival instinct, her shield. But tonight her armor had cracks everywhere. She didn't have the strength to patch them. Nick stepped inside, closing the door quietly. I thought coming home would help, she finally said, wrapping her arms around herself. But it doesn't. Every time I'm alone, I hear him. I feel that fear all over again. Nick approached slowly, like approaching a wounded animal, respectful, patient, caring. What do you need from me? He asked. Phyllis's breath shuddered. The question broke something open in her. I don't even know, she whispered. I don't want to be alone tonight. He nodded. No judgment. No expectations. Just Nick. Solid, steady, dependable Nick. He guided her to the couch, sitting beside her but not too close. She stared at the city lights, as if they might ground her. Do you want to talk about what happened? He asked gently. No, her voice cracked. But I need to. So she told him. Not everything. The worst moments were still locked inside her, but enough. Enough for him to see where the scars were forming. How did you even find the strength to fight back? Nick asked softly. Phyllis let out a hollow laugh. Strength? I didn't have strength. I had panic and adrenaline. And I kept thinking, I'm going to die, and Summer will lose her mother, Daniel will lose me, and everyone will say Phyllis Summers got what she deserved. Nick's jaw tightened. Don't say that. But it's true, she said with a bitter smile. People still blame me for everything. The schemes, the lies, the drama. They don't see that I've tried to do better. I see it, Nick said with quiet certainty. She closed her eyes. His words wrapped around her like a blanket. Unexpected, comforting. You always saw the best in me, she murmured. Even when I didn't deserve it. That's not true, he replied. You've made mistakes, yeah. But you've also grown. And what happened to you wasn't your fault. Phyllis swallowed hard. Her throat burned, her heart pounded, and suddenly she felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She cursed under her breath and wiped them away. No, Nick said, catching her hand mid-motion. Don't hide from me. He brushed a thumb over her cheek, wiping a tear she didn't have the strength to hide. You're allowed to break down. Phyllis leaned into his touch, eyes closing for a moment, just long enough to feel safe. You know what's the worst part? She whispered. I feel weak. I never feel weak. You're not weak, Nick murmured. You survived something terrifying. That's strength. And you're still here. Still fighting. That's who you are. His voice wrapped around her like a lifeline, pulling her back from the edge. She exhaled shakily. Stay with me tonight. Not romantically, not anything. I just need someone here. Of course, Nick said instantly. I'll stay as long as you need. Later, as she curled on the couch with a blanket, Nick sat beside her, keeping a protective watch. The room was quiet, but this time the silence didn't swallow her whole. Nick's presence was warm and grounding. Do you remember that night after Summer was born? Nick asked softly. When you had that panic attack because you thought you weren't strong enough to be a mother? Phyllis blinked. Yeah. I stayed with you then too. He smiled gently. Some things don't change. Her chest tightened, not painfully, but in a nostalgic, bittersweet way. You always were my safe place, she whispered. Nick looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite name. Compassion, affection, maybe even a flicker of something old and familiar. You're not alone, Phyllis, he said firmly. Not tonight. Not ever. When you need someone, you call me. The vulnerability in her eyes softened. She reached out, touching his hand. Thank you, she whispered. For being here. For seeing me. Always, Nick replied. Phyllis leaned her head on his shoulder, her breathing finally easing. For the first time since the kidnapping, the shadows lost their power. The fear loosened its grip. And in Nick's quiet, steady presence, she found something she desperately needed.